top 10 rules to a successful policy authoring. I guess I'll take the odds, David, and you can take the evens.
All right.
So,
Give me the oddball.
alluded to in that policy lifecycle management, when you're really getting going for your enterprise, you want to get, have a project kickoff, if you will. Engage the right stakeholders, right? You may not have the domain knowledge across the entire enterprise, right? The business knows what they need to achieve. They know what problems they're trying to solve. So get a representative from the business on the team. You may need a representative from security on the team. You may need some from operations to do your deployments. It doesn't mean these people have to be around for every meeting and every step of the way. You bring them in at the right time. So when you have a question, you have those people at the ready, and you can go through this process very smooth.
Cool. Point number 2 is think plain old English. I think one of the key remnants of ABAC role-based access control is that a lot of us in the identity space, we're used to doing role engineering, right? We're used to having 5 different apps that have 5 different sets of roles, and we're trying to fit permissions and entitlements inside of those roles to make them express what we want them to make them express. And when you do that, you end up having very, very complicated requirements like, a user with the manager XYZ role can get access to the get button feature. Well, that's actually wrong. What you're doing there is you're already doing your role engineering exercise. In ABAC, you should not do that. You should just think plain old English. So you should literally say, I'm dealing with teachers. I'm dealing with students. I'm dealing with janitors and other kinds of staff. And what can they do within the school? Where they can get access to grades or the janitor's closet or the classroom or the art department's supply, so on and so forth. You want to think plain old English. Don't try to invent things that don't exist. Just use what you have at hand.
Yeah, and then another thing is to get started, when you gather those requirements, you might think, wow, I've got all these different types of data I need to secure. I've got all these different types of users, all these different application channels that can access those. You may think, wow, it's a little overwhelming. How do I start? It's like, well, just get started. Pick a small area to get started with, maybe a certain type of data or a certain regulation that you need to adhere to. Start with that. But as you're working on that, keep in mind that there is a bigger picture. Because you may find as you're writing your policies, it's like, hey, I'm going to be using this rule or this policy over and over again because I know there's a bigger picture. So you may start building what you call a policy library, which will show a little bit in the demo. So just get started somewhere. Pick an area maybe that is of the greatest need, but keep in mind that there is a bigger picture as you go along.
All right, point number 4. Think about the default use case. You're defining authorization policies. What is the main thing you want to control access to? In our example today, it's school grades. But in the enterprise, it could be the bank account, the customer's bank account, or the medical journal system. Think about that default use case. Here, we're going to say teachers can view students' grades. So you can imagine teachers, one of the main principles we're using. Grades is the main asset we're protecting. And actually, in my example here, we have 2 main use cases. Teachers can view grades. Students can view grades. Mind you, their own grades. But think about that baseline. We've had customers in the past write very long requirements, really, really good requirements, but they were all negative requirements. This was a defense customer. They hadn't thought of the basic item that they wanted to give access to. And so, of course, if you don't have that basic item, there's little point doing authorization because the end goal is to let people do stuff.
And of course, before you can actually start author policies, you need attributes. Attributes are vocabulary, if you will. Like, so when David wants to write my biography, right, he's going to use the words to do that. Without words, you can't write the book. Same here in this world. You can't write a policy without attributes. So you just want to keep things simple. You've been talking about teachers and students. Well, those are values of things. And they could be values to an attribute, for example, role. So you could have a role attribute, and you could be a student, you could be a teacher, you could be an administrator, and so on. So you just want to keep this simple as you go along. Don't try to complicate it. I know David wrote this student underscore ST1 class 1 value. I'm not sure what he meant there, so I'll let him answer that and he moves on.
And that's exactly the point. I don't remember what I meant there, and that's the risk. You want to use key natural attributes. You want to use key natural values because you want the maintenance, the transparency, the understandability much better. And that goes to the following point, actually, Mark, spelling things out. In computer science, we're always tempted to shorten things and say, MGR instead of manager or TGR instead of teacher, just to save a couple characters. Which, saving characters is good. Like flavor and favor should all be written without the U, Matt. There's no point in putting a U in those words. Save the planet, please, one letter at a time. So don't use shortcuts. Don't use abbreviations unless they're very, very well-known abbreviations, so much so that we don't even know what they actually stand for. And don't use codes. Again, we have a customer in retail. They own multiple brands. Instead of using their brand names, they use the brand codes. So they have brand number 1, brand number 47. And which means that when Mark and I go work with them, we never know what brand they're talking about. For them, it's a little clear because they do that day in, day out. But think about the values. Think about essentially not having to save characters because there's no limit on how big a policy can be. So just spell things out. It makes it much easier to maintain, much more meaningful when you run those authorization policies.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes when I work with a customer, I feel like I'm learning their own secret language as we go along. So another key thing here is, you want to split up the pie, to do a divide and conquer approach. Just like in step 1, we said, hey, get a diverse team together with stakeholders. Start small, think big. It's like, hey, don't try to do it all yourself. So, from a policy perspective, you don't have to write the whole policy yourself if you've got this very large policy. You can have multiple policy authors, or you can have some people writing policies, some people writing tests. You don't have to do it all yourself. And we'll show you ways within the policy how you can divide things up to share that workload.
Yep. You talked about pie. I'm hungry. I want to go to the kitchen, get a slice of pie now. All right. So point number 8, define tests upfront. This is actually true of anything you do, whether you're developing code or developing policies. In a way, you should think of the policy development activity as very similar to writing code. And so think about your tests upfront. If you're going to say teachers can view student grades, define a test that says, can a teacher view a grade? Or who can view grades? You want to do different types of testing, unit testing, what if testing, gap analysis testing. Think about those upfront. The reason for thinking about them up front is you don't want to implement them once you've implemented the policies, because then you might introduce bias and actually test what you've written and not really test what you should have written. So just keep that in mind. Very similar to test-driven development.
Yeah, it also kind of goes into point 7 about sharing the workload. You said if you're the person writing the policies and writing the tests, you may kind of cheat a little bit on the test and just kind of copy and paste your policy into a test, and you're really not proving that you're doing what the business wants there. And what we mean by defining access review requirements is, and David mentioned this earlier, so in the testing, you're writing something, hey, can Marty view his grades? And you expect a permit. But, can Marty view Jennifer's grades? You would expect a deny. And you build up a test plan where you say, hey, this is the result I expect from the authorization service. Is this what I'm getting? Access reviews are more of the open-ended ones that David referred to as, well, all right, I know I expect a permit or deny when Marty views grades, but I may want to know, well, who can view grades? Or who can edit grades? What's required to be able to edit grades? Or even better, like, who can view the teacher's salaries? If the answer to that question comes back, oh, a user role of principal or user role of school board, that's fine. But if that answer comes back, user role students, you got a problem. So access review is more of understanding what the policy is capable of doing. And that combined with the test gives you a real good picture of what's going on.
You said Marty, Mark, but you should have said Ferris Bueller, I think. I think he breaks the access control on grades in that movie.
Probably.
Which movie takes place in your city, by the way, Mark. Final point here before we move on is document relentlessly. I mean, this is true of any activity you do, but one of the cool things of policy-driven authorization is that because you're dealing with a textual artifact with the policy, it's very easy to write comments, documentation alongside the policy. And Mark has got some great examples to show you later. So do think about documenting relentlessly.